Alrighty, Vitality Nation, my name is Dr. Nick Fanning once again, and I am joined with John Thomason here, and he owns this wonderful little restaurant called Panhandlers out in Oshkosh, Nebraska. And the reason why I brought John here isn't because of his delicious food, but he runs an organization for addiction. And John has a passion for this, and you'll quickly see why I wanted him on this interview, just to kind of understand what his drive is, what his purpose is, and then honestly, just such a great resource to have in small town western Nebraska. And I would have to definitely say probably one of the things that are underserved in this area as well too. So John, do you mind filling in some of your background and some of your bio for the people?
Yeah, first of all, just to give you a real quick rundown, I was raised in a pretty stereotypical, I would say 1950s home.
Yep.
A Christian home, attended Christian schools. But I was born perfectly broken. I was born an addict. Really didn't know about rehab in my 20s, went through a 7-day detox, and I maintained for 17 years. Just about 2 years ago, I relapsed for 10 months. And what I discovered was the truth. I think I should start by saying, the main thing that I learned was I can't take control from God. Mm-hmm. That I've got to keep God driving the bus. If I drive the bus, it's going to go off a cliff. It's that simple. My addictions aren't just drugs. As you and I talked earlier, I believe all of us suffer that are in recovery, or that are using drugs or gambling or shopping or sex or whatever gives you that dopamine release. Right. We have the disease of addiction. We're not bad people, we have a really bad disease, and we have a family disease. And cancer affects your family badly. I mean, you're dealing with expenses, etc.
Yeah.
Drug addiction, alcoholism, sexual addictions, gambling addiction destroys families. What I would like to do today is try to give some hope to families and addicts out there. There's a lot of hope. The first thing that I had to do was get real with myself. I read an interesting pamphlet called The King Baby, and we all have the King Baby in us. And what that means is very simply, when a baby screams, cries, does whatever, they get what they want.
Right.
Most addicts, let me backtrack a little. In today's society, we're really hooked on instant gratification.
Yep.
Whether it's a drive-up window or a microwave oven.
Yep. Internet porn?
Internet, sure,
everything.
Absolutely,
yep.
Absolutely. We're handing out pain pills left and right and medications to counter the side effects of them, and this thing just goes on and on. We want it, and we want it now. Addiction is a selfish disease. It's horrible. It robs the addict of any self-esteem. When my father showed up at my doorstep and basically said, "You get in the car," and I was so grateful. Let me backtrack. 2 weeks before that happened, I was in a pasture looking down a fence line, and I look at that fence line every day when I drive by it.
Yeah.
And if you've ever heard the voice of God, it's very distinct. It's very calm. It's not echoing from the clouds. It comes in here.
Yeah.
And God said, "I told you, be sure your sin will find you out." I said, "I'll quit." He said, "Too late."
Right.
2 weeks later, everybody knew. And I live in a town of about 800 people, a small community of ranchers up in the Sandhills. And I had lied to this entire town and blamed it on my spouse at the time. She was the one using drugs, not me. So not only did I have to face a drug addiction, I had to come back to this town where I had been the treasurer of the hospital. Kind of I don't want to say as a bigwig, but I definitely was involved in my community. And I had to face everybody on these streets. What happened was, I opened this cafe January 12th of 2015.
Oh, so just recently,
Yeah. I got out of rehab July 7th of 2014. So within 6 months, I opened this up.
Right.
I believe that was God's intervention in my life because I had to face everybody in this town.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that because one of the messages I want to convey today is hope. Having come back to this town and faced my demons, made my amends following the 12 steps, and I'm a big 12-step fan, huge. I personally, I've even asked people that are involved in my life to please do it as a non-addict alcoholic, just to understand the spiritual growth part of this program and the minimizing of myself and reaching out to others.
Right.
The ways I reach out is 90% of my employees are drug addicts and alcoholics in recovery. I've had them here with as little as 2 weeks, and I've got one guy who's in here with 13 years. This is a safe place for us. We're restaurant people, and restaurants are notorious for drugs and alcohol. So I create a safe haven. I create a place where I have one addict who's been clean for 4 years, and she has never had a job.
Right.
And now she works here. So what I know is that when I came back to this town and had to face the town in my business, my self-esteem started picking up.
Right.
Every day as I woke up and said, okay, God, today's yours. What's your will for my life, not mine? And by the way, God, that clock that I think runs on a certain time, I've got to give you that time schedule as well. And that's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Especially a driven guy, in control, you were in the community, just to give that up. That's a big one.
And let me tell you, I took it very serious. My father and I argued over this cafe because we own a ranch together up north.
Okay.
And actually, while I was in rehab, because I owned the building, I told God, I said, I'll open that cafe or not open that cafe based on what you tell me. And when I tell you my father and I were arguing, I mean, it had gotten like this. And one day him and I are at brunch, and he says to me, hey, why don't you go ahead and open that restaurant and let Mickey run it for you, who was a friend of mine.
Okay.
I knew that was God's signal to open this. So my hope started there. Then I come in here, and suddenly I'm fiscally and financially responsible, probably more than I ever have been in my life, because I have 7 employees counting on me for a paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
So what it did for me, in a very short time, I was able to stop focusing on John. The first thing I had to do was give my life back to God.
Right.
The second thing I had to do was grow up. Who was I to feed this selfish disease? Right.
Yeah.
And disregard my children, my grandchild, my parents, my brothers. I mean, it's again, it's a selfish disease. The next thing I had to do was get honest with myself. I walked up to my mom shortly after I opened this. She was in her yard in Estes Park, and I walked up and she said, how you doing? I said, pretty good. And I said, you know something? I said, I've been a drug addict and an alcoholic since I was about 17. My mom looked at me and said, that's the most honest you've ever been with me. That, when you start doing things like being honest, accepting responsibility, making apologies or amends, as we say in the program, serotonin starts releasing, right? We all know this.
Yep. Oxytocin. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So now hope's building.
Right.
And those synapses are firing off again and again with positive firings.
Speaking my language.
And I just, it's, and then I began feeding myself the Word of God.
Well, I mean, first, you were repairing relationships. You were rebuilding trust in their eyes, but also really just trust in your own eyes. And then once you leave it out there and you put it out there, it has less power.
Well, one of the things they teach in the program, and when I first went to rehab, I thought they were insane. Make the internal external.
Right.
I recently had a situation where I was at dinner with family, and I got a text that my face instantly went red. I couldn't see the adrenaline. It was a bad text. I walked out into the lobby of the restaurant and sat there for a minute. Again, heard the voice of God say, go sit down and tell your family what's going on. I sat down, told them what's going on. Within minutes, you get that release.
Yeah.
The other thing they told me in rehab, one of the ways you stay sober is helping others. And I'm thinking, I can't even help myself, and you want me to do what?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's the imposter complex. We have these demons inside saying, hey, you can't do this.
Right.
What business do you have? But if you're going to be role modeling, if you're going to be out there, if you're going to be helping others, holy cow, that gives you a lot.
Well, if we approach this, because this is a spiritual program, in my opinion, you can stop using and drinking. If you're really going to improve, you've got to find God. You got to find Him fast. In the meetings, we talk about a higher power. I choose the God and Jesus of the Bible. And one thing I know is I've been taught my whole life, the enemy, the devil, leaves you alone when you're doing his work. The minute you try to get your life together, here it comes. And for me, it came with self-doubt. To me, it came with friends, people who I thought were friends, I found out really weren't. But God gave me double back because now I have really true friends. And whether they're people that have been my friends for years or people in the program. So what happens then? So my self-esteem starts building, right? All of a sudden, I'm calling my family regularly. How are you doing? Just to say hi. I'm reaching out to others. And one day you look back and you say, my goodness, it's been a year and a half and I haven't touched a drug. I've thought about them. I'm human.
Right.
But not in a craving way.
Right.
And you just keep reaching out and you keep reaching out. You've got to be to the point where you're tired of quitting.
You know, we talk a lot about changing that mindset of you're no longer quitting smoking, you're a non-smoker. Or you're no longer quitting this, you're now.
Well, I think it's the same when people talk about don't go on a diet, change your eating habits. Right. So I literally did everything they told me to do to get clean. I didn't question it. And I would like to think I'm an intelligent human being. Right. And one of the things I figured out is I didn't know anything.
That's actually conscious ignorance is amazing. You're like, oh, well, thought it was so smart. I'm way smarter than this program. But once you can admit to it, you just give it over.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was talking, I introduced you, or pointed out my friend Corbin, who's in the kitchen right now getting prep done. Him and I were in the car together one day, and I said, do you know how freeing it is not to have to know everything? And not to have to be the biggest guy in the room anymore? Yeah. Because, you're trying to defer negative attention on your addiction, and the stuff that all these secrets, all this darkness, you just keep pushing down, until it gets to here, and what are you going to do with it? So going to meetings, talking to fellow addicts, helping fellow addicts, having people stop on the street and say, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you as a human being in our community. Yeah. Self-esteem is building and building. In the 12-step literature, it says, before you're halfway through these steps, you're going to see a big difference. Mm-hmm. Boy, how true that is.
Nice. I bet it's nice that the staff that you have with their backstory to see that too. People stopping by and showing that. So
and I think it's real gratifying. Of course, everybody knows in a small town the rumor mill is vicious. Oh, yeah. So when I bring people in here and I know there's rumors about them on the streets, I don't care. Right. Pretty soon, I don't hear those rumors anymore. Yeah. Same place. Yeah. And people see a difference. The neat thing about a small town is you get to see the difference you're making. The sheriff who I by the grace of God I've never been arrested for drugs or alcohol. Never been in any trouble whatsoever. Yeah. But I had lied to our sheriff. She called me at my house and said, what's going on? Right. And I had been back in the cafe probably 2 months. It was a nice sunny spring day, and she drove down the street and I flagged her down and she accepted my apology. Now she calls me when there's an addict in the jail. Can you make a call? Right. So what I did was I grew up and realized I didn't have the right, we already kind of went through these, the right to mistreat my family. I got honest with myself and said, you are an addict and alcoholic. You're not a guy that just likes to party once in a while. You've got a problem. And I might not have used for a year or two at a time, and when it came around, go gangbusters and then stop again. I hate this term, dry drunk. Right. But that's what I was. There was no growth or improvement. When I decided, I heard a pastor say, and I think it might have been Joel Osteen, who said, happiness is a choice. And I heard this about 6 months into my recovery. So on my daily positive affirmations, choose to be happy, choose to be happy. And what I found has happened is, a kitchen can be a pressure cooker. When you've got 20 people waiting for a meal and something didn't go quite right, and you've got to try to make up that ticket and get to the others that are already behind, pretty easy to get irate pretty quick. And what I now have caught myself doing is, as I'm working, I keep telling myself, remember, you're happy. You're happy. You want a busy business. You knew stress was part of this deal. Mm-hmm. So happiness is a choice. And happiness and faith and sobriety, these three things, are like muscles, and they have to be exercised daily. My faith in God has to be exercised daily. I give my life to God every morning, and 5 minutes later I have to give it back to Him again.
Amen. It makes every day new.
It sure does.
And you don't realize that sometimes that new day means new challenges of the same thing.
Well, it does.
It's daily attack or whatever it might be.
It does. And I think about the hypocrisy of we ask God for, you and I are both small businessmen, we ask God for His favor and abundance in our workspace so we might provide for our families and provide for our employees. And you better be careful, He might give it to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when He does give it to you, and you're stressed to the max because you signed off on the paper that said, I want to be the boss.
Right.
It's the same with sobriety. My sobriety only has a 24-hour shelf life, and I mean that.
Yeah.
And if I go to a meeting and there's guys with 20 years of sobriety or a guy with 3 weeks, who's got the most sobriety? Whoever woke up earliest.
Yeah.
And you can look around a room and see the people with the smile on their face. And when they talk, they might tell their story, but it's not a negative feedback at all. It's not a negative statement. These are the guys that I started paying attention to. When I started actively seeking other addicts to help them and stopped worrying about my own pathetic stuff, the smile came over my face. I'm going through the worst thing a person can go through, a divorce, and we were addicts together, and I think we got cleaned up and realized we couldn't be together. I still kept my joy. I was recently with my parents, and my mom said, I said something along the lines of, my relapse was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. And of course my folks just, what do you mean? I said, I'm a completely different person. I'm not the same John. And they both looked at me. My dad nodded. My mom said, no, you're not the same. I'm not the same because I choose to not live the way I lived. This doesn't just apply to addicts.
Right.
This is for anyone.
Absolutely, especially the daily choice.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And you probably have to make that choice over and over. Whether it's maybe with your spouse, dealing with your children, your employees, the IRS, whatever it is.
Right.
You can face hardship and not lose that internal happiness and joy. It's going to happen anyway. It's going to be a negative thing anyway. Why make it worse by wallowing in self-pity? Or for the addict, going and getting high. Take, the classic addict, here's a classic addict story. Let's say I get a letter from the IRS and I owe them 10 grand and I only got 8 in my pocket. The normal person says, all right, I'm going to call the IRS, send them this 8 and work out a payment plan. The addict says, I don't have enough money anyway, so I'm going to go blow this money on more dope to kill my pain.
Right. Or if it's not even that, it could be, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm just going to not watch Netflix all day, or I'm going to go sit behind a computer while my wife is away, or whatever it might be. Addiction is not just limited to drugs and surgery. Addiction can be anything. And again,
and the thing to remember, addiction, it's not about the drug or the activity, it's the release of dopamine in the brain.
Right.
We're as an addict. And so gambling, shopping, things that just get out of control because it gives you that little bit of release.
Yep.
The message of hope I want to pass on today to family members and addicts is there is hope.
Yeah.
If you're the family member of an addict, tough love has to start. You got to cut them off.
Right.
You got to quit giving them money. If they're living in your home, can't live here if you're going to use. You've got to be a human being about it. I was talking to a woman last night about her 21-year-old son, and I said, look, if he's coming back into your home, he should have to go to meetings, and if he drinks one drink, he's out. Well, I just can't throw him out. He'd be homeless. I said, wait a minute. I don't mean you just throw him out. What I mean is, if I catch you with a drink or a drug, your choices are 2 things. You go to rehab tomorrow. We call today and make the appointment. You go tomorrow, or you pack your bag. And when you get out of rehab, you can come home as long as you're sober. We have to hit rock bottom as addicts. Even non-addicts. I think maybe there's people that make poor choices and they hit a rock bottom so hard that they don't ever make that bad choice again. I think that I know you have children and I do too. I mean, as parents, oftentimes in a state of anger, we overreact to our child, and to me that's kind of a mini rock bottom. Well, I'm not going to do that to my child again. I was out of line, or my spouse or whatever. Yep. So you've got to let that addict, that alcoholic in your family hit rock bottom, and you've got to stop enabling them.
Okay.
You've got to turn your addict over to God. And I mean that. Yeah. God can make a way where there is no way.
Right.
And you and I know, and our audience probably knows, there are some mighty, mighty men of God whose backstory would curdle your milk.
In the Bible and in real life.
And let's remember, our Lord and Savior hung out with prostitutes, gamblers, tax collectors. This guy didn't come hang out with the local pastor.
Oh, yeah.
He was there for people like me.
And kings can be adulterers and problems.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
And, we live in a pretty economically depressed area. And I want to say this has nothing to do with economics. Drugs are not in the trailer park anymore.
Right.
When I was in rehab, 5 of us were chefs. 4 or 5 were attorneys.
Yep.
And the rest were kids.
Yep.
And I remember my dad sitting before he came to the family weekend where they explained the addict's brain and how we're developed a little different in the frontal lobes, etc. He kind of bought into it. Then at the speaker meeting, a guy got up and started talking about his cocaine and his benzo, which benzos are Valium and Klonopin, his addiction. And Dad looked at me and said, "That guy's done business for me." So people have to, as a family member, you have to accept this is a disease.
Right.
You don't have to get cut open for it. There's no diagnosis. There's not a bunch of x-rays. But there are some truths.
Right.
And we have the only disease, we have a choice as to whether we allow this progressive terminal disease to continue in our lives. So as a family member, if you start cutting off their supply, there's hope. And the sooner we hit rock bottom, the sooner we're going to come to you for hope. A drug addict's biggest problem is asking for help. I'm telling all you addicts out there right now, your families love you, your friends love you. But you've got to ask them for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. This is a disease. The government now, with whether you believe in universal health care or not, treatment is now part of the package. Right. Because this is a disease.
And I have to say, as a man, I have a lot more respect for somebody who can ask for help and go outside, because I know it takes a lot to put aside that pride and really just lay it all out. So I guess.
Yeah, and pride, that's an important point, because in the movie The Devil's Advocate, Al Pacino says a line kind of like, pride's my favorite sin. Well, why is it? Because when we're full of ourselves, we don't need God.
Right. I can do this myself.
Yeah. And you know what?
I can quit anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just an occasional user. Well, then quit.
Yeah.
Go ahead, try to quit.
Never do it again.
For the addict, hope. A lot of times you hear addicts say, "I don't have the money to go to rehab." There are Christian rehabs. I know of one in Alabama right now. It's $500 a month. The Salvation Army has wonderful facilities. If you're an addict and you can't get to rehab, or an alcoholic, 90 meetings in 90 days, do exactly what they tell you to do. Get a sponsor. If you'll go to a meeting, guys like me come up to you and say, "Here's my card. I don't care if it's 4 o'clock in the morning. If you feel like using it, call me." I have friends. One of my best friends in the kitchen right now. He called me and said, "I've relapsed. I've been sober a month. Can I come live with you?" And he's been sober since. Yeah. There are ways. And as alcoholics and addicts, we're kind of like Christians spreading the gospel. We want to spread this good news that there's a way out. There is a way out. And let me tell you something. It's wonderful to watch addicts and alcoholics, because in about 2 weeks their eyes clear up. They get a little twinkle. And then you see their families come and visit with them, and mom and dad are smiling, or the wife and the baby are smiling.
Yeah.
And
that's a new high.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And what I've done with sobriety, the serotonin, the endorphin, the dopamine release I get now are from what the hope that I have that I extend to others. And I tell I'm a pretty blunt, tough love guy. I think I say things people don't want to hear. Like, I'll sit down with an addict and say, "Are you ready to grow up? Are you ready to knock this crap off and get real about life? Are you tired of taking care of just you?"
Has to.
For the addict, there is hope. You got to get treatment. If you can't get treatment, sometimes you just can't. Get into the rooms. Even this little town of 800 people has 2 meetings a week. And if you're in a small town, I think we're probably going to reach people in western Nebraska in small towns. Usually the guys in the program, if you want a meeting every day, they'll meet you over at the lodge, house, building, whatever you want to call it, and they'll have a meeting for you. We had one guy get sober, and he couldn't afford rehab, so he slept on the couch in the AA building for a month. And we'd stop by and see him. It was before my time, but that's what happened.
That's incredible.
The other thing I want to say to the addict, no matter what you've done, no matter how bad your story, I promise you, someone's got one worse. And that's
many people have much worse.
Sure. And the other thing I would say to the addict and alcoholic, with all this shame that comes with this. There's a lot of people out there that live like addicts and alcoholics that have never picked up a drug. Never been promiscuous, don't gamble, they lead a pretty Betty Crocker life, and they're a mess. And to family members, especially if you have children, I would suggest Al-Anon, Alateen for children. And let's take a minute and talk about that real quick. This is so important for teenage children. They're floundering, thinking their brother, their mom, their dad, their grandfather is horrible and nobody knows, and they try to hide what's going on. Fear leads to distrust, distrust leads to dishonesty. And if we can get these kids in these rooms where they can talk to other kids and an adult kind of managing the situation and realize, hey, it's not my fault, Dad has this, and I can still love my dad and see him get over this. The healing that will come in your family is unreal. My father, who I told you him and I were butting heads, I actually called my dad just to say hi to him. And it was the point, I didn't care if I talked to him or not. I don't think he really wanted to talk to me a whole bunch. My mom is no longer running interference between my dad and my brothers and I, trying to make me look good and keep them at bay. This doesn't go on anymore. The judgmental, for lack of a better word, activities that went on in my family regarding addicts and people that were down and out has changed drastically. The healing in my family has been unbelievable. My oldest daughter, who was around for my first bout in my 20s, they live in Alabama and they have a horrible opiate problem there because of the Florida pain clinics. In fact, she told me the other day that every couple they know, one of them is an addict. My daughter now calls me and says, hey, I have a friend who's an addict and wants help. What do we do? What do we do? Not what do you do, Dad? What do we do? And you know, when your family members see you rise above this and then become active in it.
Authentic.
Very authentic. And bear in mind, these people's emotions when you come out of rehab or treatment are just as raw as yours. They're just as torn apart as you. And they're looking at you with a glimmer of hope. You know, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Because we hear the statistics about 98% relapse. I will tell you this. Out of 30 guys that I graduated with, 5 of us have not relapsed. That's a whole lot more than 2%.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It's not bad. It's not bad. And all these guys grabbed God, and they grabbed the program, and they did what they were told to do.
It's probably the difference right there.
And well, it is. And let's face it, Nick. As men, we don't like being told what to do. And as drug addicts, we really don't want to be told what to do. So to change that whole mindset, and as men, you know, on one hand, we're taught, be the man of your house, be in charge, lead your home as a Christian male. But at some point, I'm supposed to draw a line there and turn it over to God too. Boy, quite a juggling act going on there. What I know is this: I told you that not having to be a know-it-all is freeing, and when I can wake up every day and say, God, this day is yours. And I'll give you an example. Every day at lunch, I look at how much we've made for lunch, and I need to make X amount of dollars a day. And you know, I make what I need to make every day, and you know why? I did what God told me.
Yeah, you just give it over.
True fact. That's a true fact. So I will tell you that if anybody needs help, if there's a family out there, I'd like to give out my phone number.
Please do.
You can reach me. My name is John Thomason. You can reach me here at the cafe at 308-772-3121, or my home at 308-772-0145. My phone is available 24 hours a day. If you got a family member that needs help, if you're an addict and you don't know what to do next, please give me a call. Please give me a call, and by the grace of God, we'll get you or your family members some help.
And all that contact information at the bottom of the screen or on the website too, just so you can get hold of them. So, all right.
Very good.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough for honestly just such an amazing time where we got to really see some authenticity here. But honestly, you just laid it all out there, and I think that kind of courage, really honestly, that big step. Gosh, I can't imagine how many people you're going to impact.
Yeah. One more thing I want to say. The hardest thing an addict has to do is admit that they're an addict.
That first step.
And let me rephrase that. The first thing a person with the disease of addiction has to do is admit they have the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
And that is so hard to do. And once again, I would just implore families, that if you have a family member that's using, do the intervention. Let them know we love you no matter what. You're just not going to do this around us.
Right.
And let's get them some help because they need help and they're helpful. They're teachable.
Awesome.
And it might take 3 rehabs.
Right. Right.
It might.
Right. Stick through it.
All right.
John, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. Dr. Nick Fanning, I'm joined with John Thomason. If you haven't already, checked out Panhandlers as well. I'm so impressed by this place. And stop in and say hi to John. I know he'd welcome you. All right.
Thanks.